Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to have this hour with my colleagues, talk about a very, very important issue facing this country. The issue that's facing this Congress, it's cap and tax. Why is it important? Well, as you can see from this chart right here, cap and tax vulnerability by state. I'm from Ohio. I represent the largest manufacturing district in the state of Ohio, as well as representing the largest agricultural district in the state of Ohio. And if you see from this map when it says the vulnerability key from high, medium, low, you'll see that Ohio, along with a good part of the Midwest, is all facing a very, very tough time under this proposal. And at the same time, I know when I'm back home, I talk to the folks, and they say, well, who's proposing this? So I said, well, if you look from California to Washington, you go from Washington, D.C. up the coast to Maine, and that's where it is. And you look at that, very low vulnerability. And that concerns me. It concerns me because, as I said, that manufacturing is a lifeblood in my district. And I'd just like to talk about it for just a few minutes. First, every week I go out in my district. I go out in that district and I go into plants. And we manufacture anything from car parts, the batteries, the windshields, the washing machines, you name it, we make it. My district, when people say, what's your largest city? It's my hometown, about 30,000 people. So over 140 miles east to west, we have a lot of small manufacturers out there. We have large manufacturers. You know, when you have a large General Motors powertrain plant, when you keep going across, you have a Chrysler plant. We have a furniture manufacturing plant. As I mentioned, we have a washing machine plant. But we go across it, and then we have a lot of smaller ones. We have those plants that might employ 50 to 100 people. But those are the folks that make this economy run, because small business is the main economic engine for this country. And so when I see things like this, where you look at the vulnerability, I say right off the bat, we're in trouble. But I tell you, we're also in trouble because Ohio, being a large manufacturing state in total, we have another situation out there. And that situation is this. When you look at the plants that we've had to grow with, as our former governor, now Senator George Voinovich, used to always tell us when we were in the legislature together, that we had to work harder and smarter in the state of Ohio. Well, a lot of factories are that way now. They don't employ as many people. But at the same time, we've watched a lot of these plants, because of the economic downturn, having to lay people off. And every week when I go out into these plants, and I remember one not too long ago, I went into the plant and they said, we'd like to take you in the back. And they usually had around 180 employees, and they said, we're down to about 70. And they said, you know, we make brass fittings. And with those brass fittings, you know, they're in competition against the world, and of course that means the Chinese right now. And they said, you know, it costs us X number of dollars to make this product, and at the same time the Chinese can make it for 45 cents. They can't have any more impact on them, especially if we're going to rise the price of energy. We can't have a national energy tax, because if we do that, these companies are going to shut down and they're never going to open up again. You know, back in 1982, when we were coming out of that recession that started back in the Carter years, and we might all remember, we had 21.5% interest rates, double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment rates. Well, a lot of people, you know, it was tough, but people still thought, you know, when this thing's over, those factories are going to open up and I'm going to have my job back. Not so today. Not so today, because when people start looking around, we're in a global economy. I was a county commissioner in Wood County for 6 years, and we used to compete against Ohio, against some parts of Ohio, and over in Indiana and Michigan. But now we're competing against people on the other side of the globe, and they're going to eat our lunch if we're not careful. And when we have these situations, like I said, that you go into these plants and these folks are saying, we can't have one more increase or we're out of business. And they mean it. And then the question is going to be when they come to me and say, well, where am I going to get a job? Or like last weekend, I spoke to a commencement address. You know, and I asked them beforehand, I said, just out of curiosity, what would you like me to talk about? And they said, well, what we'd really like you to talk about is telling our graduates what you're working on, what you're helping to try to do to make sure that, where we're going to be when we come out of this tough economic situation that we're in. You can't get in, so you have to start these things off saying, I'm not going to paint you any kind of a rose-colored picture here. But if we work hard and we do the right things here in Congress, we're going to survive. But if we pass the wrong pieces of legislation, I can't go back to that same college in a couple of years and look at those next graduates coming up and say, you know what, you're going to have a job, because you might not. So what we have to do is think about these things. So as I said, when you're looking at these numbers, and just to show you on another chart, something the Heritage Foundation put together, they took all 435 congressional districts. And what they did was they did a manufacturing vulnerability index. They took what your state's percentage of energy usage from coal was, and then they took in your district, your number of manufacturing jobs. This is one of the times you don't want to be at the top of the list. My good friend, who will be on in a couple of minutes here from Indiana, unfortunately ranks #1 in vulnerability in this country because of the number of manufacturing jobs and what they have in coal generation in the state of Indiana. I'm #3 because I have 80,623 manufacturing jobs, and we get 87.2% of our energy from coal. And you put those two things together, and my manufacturing vulnerability index percentile rank is a 99.5%, which puts you at 3. And when I go across my district, I can't go out there and say, things are just fantastic, because I'm telling them, right now, I want to try to keep you in business, but I tell you, if we start passing these bills in this Congress to put a national energy tax on you, you're in trouble. And not only are you in trouble, but every generation coming up in Ohio is in trouble, because these jobs aren't going to come back. These jobs are not going to come back. And when you look, as I said, from 1982, when people thought, well, we were going to come back. Why? Because the United States was atop the heap. Today, the Chinese have become, in 2009, the #1 manufacturing country in the world. We got knocked off after over 100 years being on top. Not anymore. And that's why we got to start thinking about our future. And when you talk about what the folks want to do here, they need to look around the world a little bit. Not too long ago in the Washington Times, there was an interesting article. The headline was, China proposes emission costs fall on the consumers. The folks here in Congress are saying, well, it's not fair, if we do all these things. Well, we need to have the rest of the world cooperate with us. Well, guess what? Then I'm going to just read just one quote. And this is from their lead climate negotiator in China, said this: as one of the developing countries, we are at the low end of the production line for the global economy. We produce products, and these products are consumed by other countries. This share of emissions should be taken by the consumer, not the producer. Interesting philosophy. They can produce it, but they're not going to pay anything for it. They want us, for consuming it, to pay that cost. But at the same time, in this country, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be paying on both ends, because we're going to be paying to produce it. And it's going to be very difficult for these manufacturing jobs in states like Ohio and Indiana to stay in one spot. And if, the one thing would be that they might say, well, we're going to leave and go to another state. But I've already had companies that are multinational say, you know what, we don't even have to be in Ohio. We don't have to be in the United States. We'll just produce it in another country. And that's where we are. And I tell you what, the future is not very bleak, or is very bleak if we start looking at these things. Last summer, we talked about an all-of-the-above energy plan for this country, and the American people got it. Because first of all, when the American people went to the gas station, they saw, like in Bowling Green, Ohio, $4.19 for a gallon of gasoline. People understood right off the bat what was happening. But sometimes when they hear about cap and tax, cap and trade, they say, well, we're not really sure what that is, but it's going to affect everybody immediately when this thing starts. Let me just give you a couple of statistics here from a Heritage Foundation report. And this is what would happen, the negative impacts on the consumers, and this is from the Heritage Foundation. By 2035, this legislation would, 1, reduce the aggregate gross domestic product by $9.6 trillion, destroy 1.1 million jobs per year on average, with the peak year seeing unemployment rise by over 2.5 million jobs. Increase the average family cost by $4,800 a year. Raise electricity rates by 90%. Raise residential natural gas prices by 55%, and increase inflation-adjusted federal debt by 26%, or an additional $29,150 per person after adjusting for inflation. That's what this cap and tax, this national energy tax, is going to get us.